The young and the restless spoilers, the silence surrounding Jill's absence had become deafening. As chaos unraveled at the Ashby estate in Nice, marked by deception, betrayal, and the chilling murder of Damien Kane, those who knew Jill couldn't help but ask the same question: where was she? A storm of such magnitude had torn through the lives of everyone connected to Kane, yet Jill, one of the most formidable women in Genoa City, had remained curiously silent. For weeks, there had been rumors that she was ill, that perhaps her health had declined and she no longer had the strength or desire to involve herself in the increasingly volatile politics of her family. But those who truly understood Jill knew better. Illness might slow her, but it would never silence her. And her absence from a scene as explosive as Nice could only mean one of two things: either she had been caught off guard by the disaster, or she had orchestrated it. Jill had never been a woman to tolerate disorder unless it served her purpose. Her life had been built on a blend of cunning strategy and instinctual rage, and when those two things collided, the consequences were often catastrophic for those around her. So when whispers began to spread that Carter, the elusive and manipulative figure who had been lurking on the periphery of the Ashby estate, wasn't working alone, suspicion turned quickly toward Jill. It wasn't just that she had failed to intervene, it was the eerie possibility that she had been pulling strings from afar. The truth, as it stood, was murky. No one could confirm where Jill had been during the events that led to Damien's death. Some claimed she was receiving treatment for a chronic condition in Zurich. Others insisted she had retreated to a private villa in the Alps to grieve a personal betrayal that had never been made public. But the fact remained. Her son had been at the center of an international scandal, her family name dragged through the dirt, and Jill had said nothing. Done nothing. Until now. Word came swiftly that Jill was boarding a private jet, her face like stone, her voice clipped and ruthless. She was coming to Nice. And she was furious. Not just at the death, not just at the chaos, but at being blindsided. No one had told her what was happening, or perhaps more accurately, no one had dared. And now that the story had broken into the open, she intended to reclaim control with a vengeance. She would defend her son, Kane, regardless of whether he was guilty or not. She would clean up the mess that had tarnished their legacy. But most of all, she would find out who had dared to exclude her. What Jill didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her arrival in Nice would ignite the next phase of destruction. Because Kane, beneath his carefully curated exterior of grief and shock, was spiraling. The accusations had begun to tighten around him. Amanda no longer looked at him with trust. Victor had begun investigating him from behind closed doors. Even Lily had started to question his version of events. And Jill's arrival, intended as a shield, would instead expose vulnerabilities Kane had worked hard to keep hidden. For Kane knew that if Jill began to truly dig into the night of Damien's death, she might uncover the very things he could no longer control. More disturbing was the possibility that Jill already knew. That she had been watching from a distance, monitoring everything through Carter. Carter had been a ghost, intelligent, cold, and alarmingly obedient. He had access to rooms others could not enter, a way of manipulating the environment so smoothly that even seasoned players like Nick and Phyllis couldn't pinpoint his game. And now, pieces were falling into place. His movements. His timing. His silence. He had been too effective. Too well informed. Too embedded. And as the smoke cleared, a new theory surfaced among those brave enough to voice it: Carter was never working alone. Carter had been answering to someone. And that someone might have been Jill. If true, the implications were staggering. That Jill had orchestrated the chaos in Nice not out of malice, but out of some long-term strategy. That perhaps Damien's presence had disrupted her plan. That his growing influence, his alliance with Lily, his control over sensitive business dealings, had become too dangerous. And in that scenario, Carter's job had not been to protect Kane, but to protect Jill's empire by eliminating the threats one by one. If Damien's death was part of a broader design, and Jill had been the architect, then the legacy she so fiercely protected was soaked in betrayal. But Jill was nothing if not adaptive. The moment she stepped off the jet in Nice, the energy shifted. Her rage was like gravity, pulling everyone toward her, demanding explanation. She stormed through the estate like a queen returning to a burning kingdom. She interrogated Kane, her voice sharp, her eyes harder than ever. She wanted the truth. And she wanted it now. And when Kane faltered, hesitated, stammered some preconstructed defense, Jill saw through it instantly. She may have come to protect him, but she would not tolerate weakness. She demanded to see Carter, only to be told he had vanished. That, too, unsettled her. Because Jill didn't tolerate ghosts. She controlled them. What Jill didn't expect, what no one expected, was the arrival of Nina. Word had reached her that Damien, her son, was dead. Murdered. And she had arrived in Nice not with sorrow, but with vengeance. She didn't care about politeness. She didn't care about protocol. She wanted names. She wanted justice. And she wanted blood. Nina stormed into the estate without waiting for permission, and the confrontation between her and Jill was volcanic. 2 mothers. 2 legacies. 1 corpse. The air cracked as Nina screamed that her son had been betrayed, that the people in this house, this beautiful house, had allowed him to die. And Jill, who had expected to play judge, jury, and savior, suddenly found herself on the defensive. The confrontation escalated quickly. Jill insisted she had nothing to do with the death. Nina accused her of being a puppet master, of hiding behind layers of influence while her agents, like Carter, carried out unspeakable acts. Jill denied it. But the more she denied, the more the others began to wonder. Where had she been? Why had she stayed silent? And if she truly was innocent, why had Carter answered only to her? And somewhere, in the shadows of Nice, Carter was listening. Watching. Waiting. Because Jill's secrets were no longer safe. And neither was she. Let me know if you'd like to continue this story with a confrontation between Jill and Carter, or with Nina beginning her own investigation into the cover-up. The photograph was damning. A single image, snapped in haste but saturated with consequence. In it, Jill stood in the corner of a quiet cafe in Zurich, far from Nice, yet unmistakably connected to the chaos erupting there. She held a phone in one hand, her posture stiff, her expression ice-cold. Across from her sat a man no one could mistake, Carter. His face, usually hidden in shadows, was now captured in brutal clarity. And though the image alone said nothing aloud, it screamed the truth to those who understood the language of silence. This was no coincidence. This was command. The moment the photo was released, slipped anonymously to a contact in Genoa City and quickly forwarded to authorities and select members of the Newman and Abbott circles, everything changed. For weeks, speculation had spun in controlled whispers. That Jill, ever calculating, had stayed too far removed from the mess in Nice. That Carter, always one step ahead, seemed to act with information no one else could access. That Kane, spiraling, desperate, and increasingly unstable, was not the puppet master but the puppet. The photo confirmed what the victims had suspected and what the guilty had feared. Jill had orchestrated the entire thing. What was unclear, still buried in ambiguity, was motive. Why? Why had Jill, a woman with nothing left to prove and everything to protect, constructed a scheme so twisted that it led to the murder of Damien Kane and the public dismantling of her own son's life? The answer, like all things with Jill, was rooted in control. Control of legacy, control of narrative, control of power. Damien had been a threat, not through violence, but through brilliance. His alliance with Lily, his growing influence in business, his ability to sway loyalties, these had made him dangerous. Not just to Kane, but to Jill. Because Jill had spent decades building something fragile, a family empire constructed from betrayal, redemption, and reinvention. Damien represented a truth too strong to be manipulated, and for that, Jill had decided he had to be eliminated. The phone call between her and Carter, recorded, transcribed, and finally leaked, was cold, chilling, and deeply revealing. "You know what to do," Jill said, her voice like frost. "He's getting too close." Carter asked no questions. He didn't need to. Their relationship was forged in transactions, not trust. He was her tool, and she wielded him with precision. But the arrogance of power always leaves footprints, and Jill had left hers across Europe. Kane had become collateral damage, a son she had long struggled to fully accept, now framed to take the fall for an operation he never even understood. Inside the Ashby estate in Nice, Kane was unraveling. Every day brought a new rumor, a new accusation, a new betrayal. His mother had arrived days earlier, storming into the estate like a savior, only to twist the knife deeper with every word. She insisted he cooperate with the investigation. She encouraged him to distance himself from allies like Amanda and Lily. She said it was for his own protection. But Kane, tired of being lied to, began to see the truth. Jill wasn't protecting him. She was isolating him. Positioning him as the villain. And when he confronted her in the garden under the moonlit haze, her answer was damning in its cruelty. "You were never meant to lead, Kane. You were meant to follow. And when you stopped following, you became a liability." That night, Kane packed a bag. Not to flee, but to prepare. If he was going down, he wasn't going alone. And fate, or vengeance, delivered the first opportunity when Carter was captured at the border outside Marseille. His attempt to disappear under a new alias failed. He was tracked by facial recognition and flagged instantly. When he was brought back to Nice, battered but smirking, the entire room froze. He said nothing at first. Just stared at Jill from across the table in the interrogation room. But the tension broke when Jill refused to look back. And Carter, betrayed, humiliated, abandoned by the very woman who had built him, decided to talk. His confession, once triggered, came like a storm. He outlined every instruction, every transfer, every message. He described how Jill had chosen Damien as a target months earlier. How she used Carter to monitor conversations, intercept emails, and manipulate events from the shadows. How the murder itself may not have been directly ordered, but was certainly not discouraged. "She gave me the map," Carter said. "I just followed it." And in that moment, the monster behind the curtain was no longer theoretical. Jill was no longer a matriarch. She was a conspirator. A criminal. A tyrant cloaked in pearls. News of the confession spread quickly. Victor's team leaked it to media outlets to neutralize Jill's influence. Lily collapsed when she read the transcript. Amanda, who had stood beside Kane in doubt, now stood beside him in horror. And Kane, once defeated, found strength in the truth. He wasn't the villain. He was the survivor. And now, he would make sure the world saw Jill for what she truly was. But retribution has a cost. The more the truth emerged, the more dangerous Jill became. She didn't flee. She didn't confess. She fought. Lawyers arrived within hours. Phone records were scrubbed. Allegiances were bought. Jill had ruled too long to go down quietly. But Genoa City had changed. Nina had arrived in Nice with grief burning through her veins. Damien was her son. And now she knew who had killed him. She didn't want a trial. She wanted justice. And in her fury, Nina found unexpected allies, Nick, Billy, even Phyllis, each of them scarred by Jill's manipulations in different ways. Together, they began planning not just her fall, but her exile. For once, Jill was cornered. And though she still tried to assert dominance, barking orders and crafting lies, her empire was crumbling. Because Carter had spoken, and Kane had risen. Because Nina would not rest. Because too many people had been hurt. And as Jill stood alone in the dim hallway of the Ashby estate, the same place she once ruled with silent authority, she saw in the mirror not a queen but a monster. She didn't weep. Jill never wept. But for the first time in decades, she felt something that couldn't be spun, buried, or redirected. She felt fear. And the game, at last, was over. Let me know if you'd like a continuation where Jill tries to retaliate or if you'd prefer the focus shift to Nina's campaign for justice or Kane rebuilding his life.